The silence outside the great gate is heavier than the sound of 1,000 marching feet. You stand at the threshold of the capital you just saved, yet the iron bolts remain drawn, their heavy thud echoing like a final heartbeat against the ancient stone. Your armor is dented, the steel scarred by the blades of a dozen different nations, and the dust of several provinces covers your standard. But the banners on the ramparts do not dip in greeting. Instead, the archers look down with eyes filled with a terrifying uncertainty, their fingers twitching near the bowstrings as if you were the invader and not the savior. Behind those high walls, the man who calls you his greatest servant is already preparing your downfall. The crown you have held upright for decades, through famine and siege, is now the very weight intended to crush you. This is the moment you realize that winning a war for a paranoid ruler is often the same as signing your own final decree. Trust is a fragile currency in an empire built on the shifting sands of intrigue, and today, your accounts have been frozen. For years, you were the shield that never buckled and the sword that never failed. You reclaimed lost territories that had been forgotten by the history books, restored shattered cities where the children had forgotten the taste of bread, and brought peace to borders that had known only the language of chaos. To the common people, you are a legend in iron, a figure of myth who breathes and bleeds just as they do. To the soldiers who sleep in the mud at your feet, you are a father who never left their side, even when the winter was long and the rations were short. But to the halls of power, you are something far more dangerous, a man who is loved more than the emperor himself. In a world where absolute power is the only measure of worth, being indispensable is the quickest way to become a target. The rot within a civilization rarely starts at the edges, it begins at the center, in the rooms where golden curtains hide the pale faces of men who have never seen a battlefield. While you were sleeping on the cold ground of distant lands, the whispers in the capital were growing louder, feeding on the silence of your absence. They spoke of your growing influence, your perceived ambitions, and the way the crowds in the provinces shouted your name louder than they cheered for the throne. They took your victories and reframed them as acts of defiance, suggesting that every city you captured was a kingdom you intended to keep for yourself. They took your humility and called it a mask for hidden pride, a calculated performance designed to win the hearts of the masses. A ruler who fears his own shadow will eventually strike at anything that shines too brightly, and today, that light is yours, casting a shadow that the emperor can no longer ignore. To understand the depth of this potential betrayal, one must look back to the flames of the Nika Riots, when the city was a funeral pyre and the throne was nearly lost. You remember the smell of the smoke and the screams of the 30,000 who perished in the hippodrome to secure a reign that was sliding into the abyss. It was then that the emperor learned the true cost of survival, and it was then that the empress, with her nerves of steel, declared that the purple of the imperial robes makes for a fine shroud. They chose power over the people that day, and they have never stopped making that choice. Every building raised since then, even the magnificent Hagia Sophia with its dome that seems to touch the heavens, is a monument to a power that demands absolute submission. The beauty of the marble masks the memory of the blood spilled to keep it white, and you, the one who did the spilling, are the only living witness left to remind them of their vulnerability. Consider the nature of devotion when the object of that devotion has turned sour and bitter. You gave your youth to the expansion of these borders, trading the comforts of home for the biting wind of the frontier. You gave your health to ensure the safety of citizens who now look away when you pass, their eyes darting to the floor as if your presence were a contagion. The emperor, once your closest confidant and a man you called a brother in all but blood, now views your presence as a constant reminder of his own perceived inadequacies. He sees your scars not as symbols of sacrifice, but as marks of a man who has survived too many things he was meant to perish in. Every victory you brought home was another brick in the wall of resentment he was building between you, a wall now so high that neither of you can truly see the man on the other side. The city you see before you is a masterpiece of marble and gold, a testament to the wealth your wars have secured, but its foundation is decaying beneath the surface.
What is that awful
Corruption
stench?
flows through the administration like a slow-moving poison, draining the life from the very people you fought to protect. You see the tax collectors taking more than the harvest can provide, their ledgers filled with the costs of a luxury that the common man will never know. You see the governors growing fat in their villas while the frontier outposts starve, their pleas for help lost in the bureaucratic labyrinth of the palace. You fought to preserve a dream of what this empire could be, a vision of justice and order, but you are forced to face the reality of what it has become. It is a machine that often consumes the righteous to fuel the ambitions of the hollow, and it has finally run out of enemies to eat, so it has turned its hunger toward you. When the Great Plague arrived, it did not care for titles or territories. It swept through the capital, claiming nearly half the population and turning the Golden City into a sprawling graveyard. You watched as the emperor himself fell ill, and for a moment, the world held its breath, wondering if the dream of a restored Rome would die with him. But he survived, emerging from the fever with a spirit more brittle and suspicious than before. He saw the piles of dead as a personal affront, a sign that his control was an illusion. In his recovery, he did not seek to heal the empire, he sought to tighten his grip on what remained. He began to see enemies in every cough and traitors in every silence. To a man who has looked into the eyes of death and felt powerless, a general who commands the life and death of thousands is a variable he can no longer tolerate. The meeting in the throne room will not be an event of grandeur or a public trial where you can defend your honor. It will be a matter of quiet, calculated cruelty conducted in the shadows. There will be no accusations you can easily argue against, no evidence you can refute with the logic of a soldier. Instead, there will be the cold, steady stare of a man who has already decided your fate before you even step through the door. He will look at you not as the savior of his realm, but as a problem to be solved, a variable that no longer fits in his equation of power. The loyalty you held as your highest virtue will be used as the chain to bind you. Because you are loyal, you will walk into the trap without your sword. Because you are honorable, you will not strike back even when the knives are drawn. They count on your goodness to ensure your destruction. Think of the soldiers who followed you into the mouth of the storm, the men who are even now waiting outside the walls, wondering why the gates remain shut. They are the ones who truly pay the price for this shift in favor. When a leader of merit is discarded for the sake of political convenience, the spirit of the army begins to wither and die. They see that the reward for excellence is suspicion, and the reward for sacrifice is abandonment by the very throne they bled for. The walls of the empire are not made of stone, they are made of the will of men who believe in their cause and their commander. Once that belief is shattered by the treachery of the crown, the stone walls will follow soon after, unable to stand against a world that senses their internal weakness. A kingdom that discards its protectors is a kingdom that has already invited its own end. The Empress, too, plays her part in this dark theater, a silent architect of the coming storm. She is a shadow behind the throne, a mind sharper than any blade and just as cold, calculating the risks and rewards of your existence. She understands the politics of survival better than anyone, having climbed from the depths of the city to the heights of the palace. To her, you are a chess piece that has moved too far across the board, a piece that threatens to checkmate the very system that grants her power. She fears your popularity among the lower classes, the way the beggars and the merchants speak of your fairness as if it were a miracle. In her eyes, a just man is a threat to a system built on favoritism, fear, and the exchange of secrets. She doesn't need you to be guilty of a crime, she only needs you to be gone so the game can continue as she intended. As you walk through the palace corridors, the silence is punctuated only by the echo of your own boots on the marble. You notice the shift in the air, a drop in temperature that has nothing to do with the weather. The courtiers who once scrambled to be seen in your presence, who laughed at your jokes and mimicked your posture, now vanish into side rooms as you approach. The laughter stops when your shadow touches the threshold of the room. It is as if you are already a ghost wandering the halls of your own legacy, a phantom of a time that the city is trying to forget. This is the isolation of the fallen, a curated silence designed to make you doubt your own worth and your own sanity. They want you to feel small, to feel like an intruder in the house you helped build, hoping you will forget that you were the one who kept the darkness at bay while they slept in silk. The charges brought against you will be vague, draped in the shifting language of administrative necessity and the security of the state. They will talk about the mismanagement of funds that were never sent to the front, or the unauthorized movements of troops who were fighting for their lives against impossible odds. They will take the very tools you used to save the empire, your strategic brilliance, your independent judgment, your rapport with the men, and present them as instruments of treason. It is a slow, methodical unmaking of a hero, a process of stripping away your humanity piece by piece. They will take your titles, your lands, and your honors, thinking that by taking your belongings, they can take your essence. They fail to understand that a man's character is not held in a deed of property or a golden medal. But there is a strength in the truth that no decree can reach, a resilience that the emperor can never possess. Even as they move to erase your name from the monuments and rewrite the chronicles of your campaigns, the memory of what you did remains in the hearts of those you saved. You realize that your loyalty was never truly to the man on the throne, but to the idea of the empire itself, the people, the history, and the future they deserve. You serve the farmer in the field and the merchant in the stall, not the ego of a paranoid sovereign. The betrayal of the emperor is his own failure, a testament to his own weakness, not yours. He is losing the only man who could have saved him from his own worst impulses, and in his blindness, he believes he is winning a great victory. The final confrontation in the inner sanctum is a masterclass in psychological tension. You stand before the sovereign, unarmed and unbowed, the weight of your service making you appear taller than the man sitting on the elevated chair. He speaks of the heavy burden of leadership, using words like stability and the common good to mask the scent of his own fear. It is a script written in the ink of cowardice, delivered by a man who cannot look you in the eye for more than a second. In your gaze, he sees the reflection of the man he failed to be, the man who stayed in the fray while he hid behind walls. He offers you a way out, a quiet retirement in total obscurity, a complete surrender of your voice and your history. He wants you to disappear, to become a footnote that no one reads, so he can stop feeling the weight of your presence. What does a man do when his life's work is dismantled by the very hand he swore to protect? You could have raised your banners at the first sign of trouble and marched on the capital with an army that would have followed you into hell itself. The gates would have opened for you not out of fear, but out of love. The people would have cheered your name as you ascended the steps. You could have taken the crown and sat upon that cold chair yourself, replacing a weak man with a strong one. But to do so would be to become the very thing you fought against. It would be to prove their suspicions right and to shatter the very law you spent your life defending. Your final act of defiance is not a rebellion of force, but a rebellion of character. By refusing to break your oath, even when the other side has shattered theirs into 1,000 jagged pieces, you remain the only truly free man in the room. The darkness of this thriller is not found in the battles you fought or the blood you shed, but in the quiet room where your future is stolen by a pen and a seal. It is the realization that the greatest enemies are often found in the places we call home, and the deepest wounds are delivered by the people we once loved. The empire will continue for a time, fueled by the momentum you gave it and the peace you bought with your blood, but the rot is now absolute and irreversible. Without a pillar of integrity to hold up the ceiling, the halls of power will eventually collapse under the weight of their own deceit and the vacuum left by your departure. You are the last of the greats, a relic of a time when honor meant more than survival, and your exit marks the beginning of the long night. As you leave the palace for the last time, the sun is setting over the city, painting the marble in shades of bruised purple and dying gold. The domes of the great cathedrals look like cooling embers in a hearth that has gone unattended. You have nothing left but the clothes on your back and the memories of 1,000 different horizons where the world felt wide and full of promise. Yet, as you walk through the gates that finally open to let you out, now that you are no longer a threat, you feel a strange and heavy sense of peace. The burden of the crown and the survival of the dynasty is no longer yours to carry. The fate of the decaying empire is no longer your responsibility to forestall. You gave everything you had, and if the world chose to throw it away, that is the world's tragedy, not yours. History is a fickle and often dishonest narrator. It may record you as a hero who was misunderstood, or it may repeat the lies of the court until they become the only truth known to the next generation. But the stones of the walls you defended know the truth in their very grain. The soil of the fields you reclaimed, now blooming with life, knows the truth. In the end, the dark thriller of power ends the same way for all who seek it at any cost. They are left alone in their golden cages, terrified of the next man who might show the same loyalty you once did, surrounded by sycophants who will betray them the moment the wind changes. They have traded their greatest defender for a momentary sense of security, and the debt of that trade will eventually come due with interest. The legend of the loyal general doesn't end with a flourish of trumpets or a grand procession, but with a quiet walk into the mist of the morning. It is a story of a man who was too big for a small era, a man whose shadow frightened those who lived in the dark and preferred the comfort of their own illusions. As the city lights fade behind you, the empire begins its long, slow descent into the shadows of history, having extinguished the only flame that could have guided it through the night. You are gone, and with you, the last hope of a crumbling world that didn't know how to value the very thing that kept it alive. In the final reckoning, the walls of the palace are far thinner than the walls of a man's conscience. The emperor will spend his remaining nights listening to the echoes of his own fear, jumping at the sound of the wind, wondering when the next general will arrive and if that one will be as honorable as you were. He has created a world where no one can be trusted, and he is the very first prisoner of that world, locked in a cell of his own making. You, stripped of your rank, your wealth, and your home, are the only one who walks away into the night with a soul that is still your own. The darkness has claimed the empire, but it could not claim the man who stood against the tide. The throne remains, cold and imposing, but the glory has departed with the man who carried it, leaving only the hollow reality of a crown that sits upon a head filled with shadows and the sound of iron bolts locking for the very last time.